welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of an absolutely riveting romantasy. It is so much fun. It's full of magic and dragons and spicy scenes and lots of romantic tension and just lots and lots of really good stuff. I am so excited. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Of course. Hi. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. So I'm Hazel McBride. I am a Scottish fantasy romance author, and my debut is coming out on the 27th of May. It's called A Fate Forged in Fire, and it's the first of a duology set in a world where there are hopefully many future duologies to come. So we're embarking on a bit of an adventure.
That's so great to hear because I'm already so ready for more of this world. It's so vivid and really richly built. And I have lots of questions about your world building. But before we
Ooh.
get to that, tell us a little bit about your career and your journey to this book. Congrats on your debut. That's great. What led you to this project?
So way back when I was like a teenager, writing was always a huge hobby of mine. Avid bookworm, read everything I could get my hands on growing up, but it was never really like the primary focus of a career for me. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I indie published my first YA trilogy, which is, there's still some elemental magic in there. It was still set in Scotland, but in the modern day. And, I just thought, hey, I'll indie publish this. It was kind of coming up on people's radars at that point, and I was like, oh, maybe this is just something I can do. And, anyone who maybe wants to read this or is interested might like give it a go. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say I was a particularly successful indie author. There's a reason why I enjoy having like my team behind me now. It definitely suits me more. And then in 2022, I actually started writing fan fiction again. That's something that I had done when I was much younger. I got, addicted to House of the Dragon and immediately just felt so inspired. I was like, I need to start writing something. So to AO3, I went and people read it, like a lot of people, like hundreds of thousands of people. And it kind of took off and was a little bit insane. But it gave me the confidence to write my first adult fantasy series, which led to A Fate Forged in Fire. And that's actually how my agent found me as well. She read my fan fiction and was like, hey, do you have anything original there? So I basically took my writing exercise from writing fan fiction and writing a new adult fantasy inspired by my Scottish culture and heritage, lots of feminine rage, and of course, dragons. So it all kind of led to this book.
I love that. Yeah, I am also a devoted fan of House of the Dragon and of AO3. It's just like a really lovely, supportive community. And I think obviously there's so much great stuff to read there, but I think it's also really underrated just as like a writing community and
Yeah.
fostering new writers. That's so cool.
I think, a lot of people don't understand that so many, famous authors came from fan fiction. You've got Victoria Aveyard, you have Ali Hazelwood, you have Thea Guazon, who wrote the Hurricane Wars most recently. We're coming over from fan fiction. Like we're kind of honing our craft, I want to say, by writing fan fiction. It's like an exercise in writing. You can explore your prose, you can explore character development within, a world that already exists. Like the blueprint is already there, and then you're just playing around with it. So I never really understand why people look down on fan fiction writers sometimes and be like, oh, that's just fan fiction. Because some fan fictions are like masterpieces. Some of it's the best literature I've ever read in my life. Some of my favorite works of fiction are fan fiction. So yeah, it's such a lovely community, and they've been so incredibly supportive of me and this journey. And I'm so grateful and thankful to AO3 and to all of those people who commented and gave kudos and encouraged me to upload chapters, because without that, I don't know if I would have had the confidence to really pursue this as a serious career.
Yeah, to me, fanfic sort of feels like, taking a watch apart to see how it works. I
Yeah.
can see like getting like especially with House of the Dragon, there are a whole bunch of very interesting, complex, and like messy character dynamics, which
Mm-hmm.
is what draws me to the show. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
be absolutely fascinated to be like, okay, I am so interested in the vibe between these characters. How do they do that? How do they make that work? Yeah, so it feels like it's getting to know the craft by via dissection almost.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about your book. I'd love to talk a little bit about Amira. Is that how you say her name? Yeah, great.
Yeah, Amira.
Amira. I love her. She is so full of the feminine rage that you mentioned. So I'd love if you could
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about shaping her, particularly in terms of like the status of women in your world, because it's complex and it's not the same as it always was.
Oh, where to begin? So yeah, Amira, she is a very complex female character who is deeply flawed. When we meet her, she is extremely arrogant, very self-centered, and she's written that way on purpose. I'm sure a lot of readers are not going to like her in the beginning, and that's okay because she's very full of herself. And let me tell you, she gets humbled. She gets humbled real fast. We've got that. We do have a character arc throughout the two books. But a lot of that is her response to her changing environment. She has been told, stay small, stay in your place. And she's been waiting and waiting and getting more and more frustrated the older she's gotten to try and fight for her place in the matriarchy and restore, this territory to the ways of the goddesses. So she's sitting back and watching all of these things happen, men taking power and abusing that power. And she knows that she can do something about it, but just not yet. So she's a mix of all of, she's a product of her environment and her upbringing and how she was raised and the people who raised her, the way that they taught her to view herself as well. So yeah, within this crumbling matriarchy, writing the matriarchy was really difficult actually. It was harder than I thought it would be. So where our story is set, there hasn't been a female ruler in the last 100 years, and no one really knows why that stopped happening. People say it's a curse from the goddesses because the royals are, turning their backs on that, and maybe they're being punished for it. So we're starting to see some sexism creep into the world that wasn't really there prior. There's a lot more disrespect towards women, also towards queer people, where previously women were very respected, the world was very queer normative, and everyone was, celebrated and praised for their individual strengths. Whether you were a man or a woman or gender fluid, whatever your strengths were, that's what you played to. You ended up as a healer or a blacksmith or a guard or a warrior or, a cook. Anyone could be what they wanted to be, regardless of, gender. That's changing. So yeah, I always talk about when I was crafting a scene that was a council room scene, and I automatically made everyone at the table a man. And it wasn't until I was halfway through writing the scene where I was like, wait, this this wouldn't happen in this society, because even though, people are turning away from the matriarchy, surely there's going to be some, older women left who are there to kind of pass on the wisdom. So I had to unpack a lot of my own internalized misogyny, and I looked actually a lot at the animal kingdom. I was a zookeeper for 10 years prior to being an author. So, I looked at elephants, I looked at killer whales, dolphins, any animal who exists in a matriarchal society, to look at the role of women, the role of grandmothers, the role of, who's passing on intelligence and wisdom to, keep the survival of the group or the family or the species intact. And that really helped, keeping that picture in my mind of, the importance of women, but also the importance of men within the society and how they support one another. And then imagining how the patriarchy would kind of come storming through that, and then what everyone's reactions would be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating. And it's a really, interesting to look at a society that is at a point of transition like that.
Yeah.
And I really love the religious debate sort of aspect of it too. Before I was a librarian, I was a medieval historian. And so I am very, very interested in sort of like the medievalisty type
Mm,
elements and especially the role that society plays in religion. 'Cause I think that it can
yeah.
be hard for modern people to understand an entirely different way of relating to it, if that makes sense. Mm.
100%. So I was raised Catholic, which might surprise a lot of people reading the book. I'm still a practicing Catholic, and everyone's relationship to God can be very individualistic. But there's a reason why I chose to write about a patriarchal religion overthrowing and using religion as its means of overthrowing the matriarchy, because even I can acknowledge the problems that come from patriarchal religion and its role in oppressing women and trying to keep women in their place. Like, women being submissive is not natural. There's a reason why there's so many sermons teaching women to stay in their place or telling them to stay in their place, because it's not natural. We are not naturally submissive. That I mean, some women maybe are more shy or more introverted, of course, but submission does not come naturally to women. So there's a reason that religion leans very heavily on that narrative. So if anyone reading it gets uncomfortable, I urge you to ask yourselves why and maybe unpack a little bit of that potential religious trauma, if anyone who was raised in organized religion can potentially have lingering. But what I really do, like, obviously book one's not out yet, but going into book two, we unpack a little bit more about that religion. Obviously, we're exploring the world through Emira's eyes, so we're seeing, the true religion, which is the patriarchal religion, through her experiences and how she sees it. So it's very, very negative for her. So that's how the reader experiences it. Going forward, as we move through the world, we are going to get a bit more nuance into, is it everyone who practices this religion this way? How do they feel about it? Is it evolving? It's still quite a new religion. It only came into effect about 300, 250 years prior. So it's still in its founding stages too within society. So, I find that very interesting. But yeah, Emira definitely is team goddesses and not team priests.
Absolutely. And that's a really great point and very interesting, because I think it's very easy for people to assume that a religion is also a monolith, that everybody who claims to be a part of a religion believes all the same
Yeah,
things in the same way. And so I'm very
yeah,
excited to see sort of like the nuance like within. Let's talk a little bit more about the goddess magic if we can, and
of course.
building a magic system, like what sort of goes into that? Because it's like I loved also visualizing it. Like it's very vivid, and I'm
Mm.
very curious about sort of how you shaped it.
Yeah, so we have a lot of influence from Celtic folklore and Celtic mythology. So the one goddess that we explore a lot within book one is Brigid, who is actually the Celtic goddess of fire. And in my book, she's also the goddess of fire. So basically, the way it works is there are five different goddesses, and each of them will bless a person, if they're lucky enough, with a drop of magic. The goddesses are discriminate. They can be, judgmental. They kind of exist on a different plane. There's obviously the questions of, are they real? Are they not? But, the evidence that they are real is very tangible within this world. So some people are lucky enough to be blessed, some are not. And if you're blessed at birth, the magic will make itself apparent. Some people have the ability to summon fire at will from within themselves. Other people are able to, light a candle or manipulate an already existing fire, in the world. If you're blessed with magic, you are also then able to go and bond to a mythical creature. So at this point in time, mythical creatures are contained to the territories in which they are born. So fire creatures like dragons, phoenixes, chimeras, firebirds, they all exist in Chirchina, which is where this story takes place. So if you're gifted with magic, you're then able to go and bond, and then the strength of magic of your creature increases your depth of magic too. So do some people abuse that? Potentially.
It's so interesting. And that's you actually provided me with a really lovely segue to talking about the romance elements too, because I think
Mm,
fire and fire imagery is like sort of the linking point between the fantasy and the romance. Um,
yes.
there's so much interesting overlap between like fire as an element and also elemental magic, but also
Hmm.
like fire and magic as sort of emotional energy that kind of needs to be put somewhere. So, yeah, could we talk a little bit about the emerging romance?
Yeah, so we've already spoken about how Emira is very hot-headed. That definitely comes from her magic too. She has all of this inside of her. She's extremely powerful, and sometimes it just needs to explode out of her, and sometimes it does that in varying ways. And there is one person within this world who really gets her temper going, and that is Prince Fiorian, who is a dragon rider. He represents everything that she is against, or so she thinks, and they really don't like each other very much when we meet. When we meet, um, so yeah, chaos ensues.
I love, and this is going to out me as a person who has been to therapy, but my favorite aspect of sort of the, enemies to lovers' journey, as it were, is that, like love and hate are both, equally strong affect, sort of.
Mm,
They can, horseshoe theory like, they can feel a lot like each other
yeah,
because they're both, we talk about both in terms of passion, right? Like both anger
yeah.
and love. Could you talk about shaping Prince Fiorian as a character too? Because he's interesting. Like you do like you want to hate him with Amira, but also there's something that's sort of very captivating about him too.
Yeah, it's God, I love the two of them so much. And I'm trying really hard not to spoil a lot of things. So I'm trying to be very careful with what I say and what I don't. So, both of our characters are extremely flawed in different ways. Fiorian definitely views himself as very just and very righteous and very fair within his own worldview. So if someone doesn't agree with that, he's just going to be like, well, you're wrong because I know what is best and I am making these choices because I believe they are best. Are they the right choices? Not always. So Emira and Fiorian kind of have this push and pull with one another. They egg each other on, like that fire that's within both of them. They really kind of stoke that fire for better and for worse, but also they have slightly different edges to each other. Fiorian had a very different upbringing to Emira. Emira had a very loving adoptive family who nurtured her as a whole person. Fiorian grew up within the castle with a father who was descending into madness and a mother who was, while she wasn't detached from him, he was definitely a parentified child. We don't get an awful lot of glimpses into Fiorian's past within book one, but there will be a lot more coming in book two to be able to understand why he is the way he is a little bit more. He feels a huge sense of responsibility for his family, also for the territory, because he is one of the last dragon riders. He is gifted with a lot of magic. But there's a lot going on behind those castle walls that's keeping him from doing what is right all the time.
It's another place I think where the sort of the medievally elements of fantasy sort of come in that I'm going to say something totally anachronistic, but like your family was also sort of your brand, and
Oh,
your
yeah.
job.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and your identity is all wrapped up in it. And I think in a way that's very different to how modern families work. And the pressure of having expectations that one has
Oh,
to
yeah.
live up to on a public level, as it were, too. A little bit of a turn, but could we talk a little bit more about world building the city? I love some of the places that we see, especially very early on. The tavern where Amira likes to hang out first is really.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to go there. That sounds great.
Yeah, it was the first thing I did before I started writing. I'm a bit of a pantser, so I don't really like to plot too much. Like I will never go in with like a chapter outline because I will end up changing it. But because I knew this is the first duology of many, we're going to hopefully have one duology per territory, and there are 5 territories. This is a big world. There's a lot to explore. I wanted it to feel big. I wanted it to feel lived in. So the first thing I did was start building the world and I looked at, okay, well, who do these people worship? Right, let's start with religion. Okay, let's build up the goddesses. Okay, that led into worship cycles. Each goddess has a season, so if we talk about Bealtaine, that's Brigid's season. Summer is coming, their magic will swell, people give more offerings, there's a feast day. Lunasa is Bera's season, going really into that Celtic pagan gods and goddesses, like the season of the harvest, etc., and trying to figure out how that would affect people's lives and how they would mark their time. Then even deeper than that, thinking about, okay, well, what type of clothes would they wear? Okay, well, they'd mostly wear wool because it's a bit cold. It's, inspired by Scotland. Okay, where are they getting their wool from? Are there sheep nearby? Where are the sheep? Who looks after the sheep? I went deep. I have 200 years of history prior to where this story even begins. I know Queen Lysandrea, who Emira idolizes and mentions a few times. She lived 200 years before Emira was even born. She lived in the matriarchy when dragons were abundant. So her life was very different from Emira's. So I think what was really important to me was to be able to see how the territory has changed, how it was in history and how those people were within history and how the 50-year war that happened 200 years ago changed everything, really. And also what readers probably don't know if they don't follow me on social media is how all of these things are going to come into play by the very end. So every duology is a standalone, but there is an overarching storyline that is happening in the background. So there's stuff in book 1 that's going to come back in like book 10. So yeah, there's a lot of world building, but we will get to it. I made the mistake of putting the entire map in book 1. So a lot of readers are like, why did we not travel? And I'm like, guys, let me cook. Give me time.
That is so cool, and I'm so glad to hear that. When you've done that kind of deep research and world building, is it a struggle to sort of like not want to throw it all on the page immediately? Because I imagine like you've done so much, like researching a dissertation. Like I did so much work. I want you to see all of it.
Oh, it's so funny. There was like half a page where I just talked about dragons, where I was like, this dragon lived and was ridden by this rider, and this I think what still made it in, I think Princess Isabel still made it in somewhere because her story is so cool. Like she claimed this wild silver dragon when she was like 14 years old. And like defied her parents and stuff. And, I've done this not only for like the Dragon Clan, but also in a different territory for the Griffin Clan. Like they have civil wars. I have note of every civil war and why each of them started and how long it lasted and brother fighting sister and all of this. Which is really good for me because I can then refer to that world building document whenever I question myself in the writing process and make sure like all the dates are correct and, I'm mentioning the right names and people lived at the right time and I'm not mixing things up. So it's nice to have that blueprint for me. But yes, my editors were definitely like, we're going to need to cut some of this out and put it in future books because there's too many words.
And then you have the material, down the line for the world book too, with the really lush fantasy illustrations and whatnot.
Let's hope.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This book has been such a delightful ride so far. I was saying before, I'm about 3/4 through, and I'm like, I need to get home from work and like read
I
more.
know, trying so hard not to spoil it for you.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, is there anything else you want to share? Do you have a place where any social media sites that you'd like listeners to check out or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me everywhere at Hazel McBride author. I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, and I'm on YouTube.
Great. All right, listeners, so it's your job now. You heard that. Please check out A Fate Forged in Fire. By the time that you hear this, it'll be out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library, wherever you like to go for those things. And we'll see you next time. It's time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.